Dear friends, let me first congratulate everyone involved in the inauguration of the Jeffrey Cheah Institute on Southeast Asian Studies, especially, of course, Tan Sri Jeffrey Cheah himself, and my old friend, Professor Wu Bing Tai. Thank you for inviting me to this very important event and for the wonderful hospitality I've enjoyed so far. I look forward to more, and I hope to return that hospitality as soon as I can. I'm sure also that there are many areas where ISEAS, my institute, and the Jeffrey Cheah Institute on Southeast Asian Studies can work together in the near future. ISEAS is the oldest research institute in the region working on Southeast Asia, and the JCI, of course, is the newest. So I think there is a lot of room for synergy that can grow out of collaboration between the two institutes. I look forward to that. And furthermore, as you would know, ISEAS chairman, Professor Wang Kang-Wu, is also a member of your IAC, the council. Now, to the subject of my talk. Now, I'm not an economist, so I'll try to keep away from economics. If anything, I think I'm more a political scientist than anything else. Now, I'll start by making some initial points about what I want to talk about. First point, now ASEAN member countries live under very diverse socio-political and socio-economic conditions, and so one would expect that bilateral relations with a rising China will vary quite a bit among the different countries in accordance with their level of development. Point two, China's rise means a natural increase in influence for its giant economy, meaning it naturally threatens the regional and global status quo. But that does not mean that it has to be destabilizing. And what we're seeing is that China is developing very quickly within a system that it did not create or participate in creating. And so there's a certain tension there. Point three, I think ASEAN countries will continue to balance between China and other great powers, and they will need to stay united if they are to maximize strategic gains. Now to point one of the first things that hit anybody studying Southeast Asia, of course, is that the cultural and historical differences are huge among the 10 countries, not to mention the developmental, strategic, and political gaps that have been mentioned so far. Now, these differences mean that each country by itself is also easily manipulated and pressured by big powers. And this, I think, is what is strengthening the rationale for these countries to support the ASEAN process, which despite everything is actually developing quite well. Now, Southeast Asia's countries can be dissected in many ways, as you would know. One can divide them into northern, southern, and eastern Southeast Asia. The north is not only Buddhist culturally, but they also border China. And they are continental, and they have had a long history of dealing with the powerful neighbor up north. Now in the south, we have the maritime and Muslim Southeast Asian world. And to the east, of course, we have the Catholic Philippines, at least in the northern Philippines. Now up north, except for Thailand, we are also dealing with countries that, like China, have only recently come out of command economic structures. The southern countries, together with Thailand, have had more globalized and open economies, so that's quite an important line to draw. And if we throw in colonial heritage as well, then the picture looks even more complicated, and the differences go even deeper. The east was under American Spanish control, as we know. The south was English and Dutch, while the north was French, apart from Burma, which was to an extent an extension of British India. So culturally very different, geographically very different, geopolitically very different, and different where colonial legacy is concerned. But there is more. It is also significant that the ASEAN 6 that founded ASEAN in 1967 include the most developed economies in the region today, and they have now collaborated with each other for a long time. That is a very important asset that is usually not noticed. Now, the CLMV countries, the latecomers, were drawn into Southeast Asian regionalism only very recently, really. Vietnam joined in '95, Myanmar and Laos in '97, and Cambodia as late as 1999, only 15 years ago. There is therefore a natural two-tieredness to ASEAN, which becomes relevant in certain important contexts, such as in relations with big powers, for example. Now, the CLMV countries are all going through tremendous structural changes, with Myanmar initiating its massive economic and political reforms as late as late 2010. But it did so in such undeniably profound and consistent ways that the rest of ASEAN has agreed to it taking up its deferred ASEAN chairmanship already this year. Now, that's that much about the ASEAN countries. Since most of my points will be about the relationship between ASEAN countries and China, if I now look at China itself, on the other side of my analysis, we have China, who struggled to find its footing in the modern world, took over 150 years. I'm sure most of you would agree, and of course the charts shown today confirm that China began its economic revival seriously only after 1978, and successfully only in the last 20 years or so. That is after the end of the Cold War. Now, the fast pace at which China has grown economically and the steep learning curve in international trade and economics that has involved for the country is matched by attempts to keep up and adapt where political restructuring and foreign relations at the same time are concerned. We are talking about a giant ship of state repairing itself while sailing on the high seas. There's therefore instability involved and uncertainty in its ability to continue reforming and becoming integrated into the world system. Chinese policies have to be understood in such a context. It is making do. It is feeling the stones in the river as it wades along. This tentativeness informs its foreign policies. For other countries, this making do attitude on China's part should be understood and handled diplomatically. Now, as China rises, what has always fascinated me is how the rest of the world tends to think that any expansion of its influence, either through its economic clout or through its increased confidence in the political and strategic fields, should be eyed suspiciously and as a strategic choice on China's part. And I think that sort of overrates the choices that China actually faces. We're talking about a giant economy whose growth cannot help being a challenge to the status quo. China's influence and clout expanded naturally as soon as it got its political economic act together, which in many ways is a reflection of its severely diminished stature before 1992. It cannot help but become influential. It is growing as if on steroids. It's growing really fast. And at the same time, like a young teenager, it is clumsy and it is very sensitive. Secondly, we have to note that it is in the nature of the capitalist mode of production that a growing economy will seek to secure supply chains, be these of energy, raw material, or technology, and secure markets. With China's size, this securing of supply chains and distribution channels cannot but rock the boat. The rise of China does not happen in a power vacuum. Whatever the language used, win-win scenarios are perceived always alongside fears that at some level, especially at the big power relations level, the game is a zero-sum game. At some point, what's good for China cannot be good for Japan or the US and so forth. Now, China's growth is understood as a threat to big economic powers such as the USA and Japan, to their supply chains and to their market shares. There is almost no policy path that China can choose that will not be seen as a threat to these powers, be it for fear of its success or for fear of its failure. So much of the problem actually lies here. Big powers have more to lose than small powers when China rises. For middle powers and small countries like those in Southeast Asia, the preferred strategy so far is to play it both ways. For ASEAN members, it is often said that the USA is about strategy, China is about geography. These countries have to manage China in ways that are quite different from how they manage other big powers. China's increasing power cannot be ignored by them and has to be managed on a daily basis. And so ASEAN, the organization of ASEAN, is their best bet in the long term in handling big powers. Now, let me say a few words about key ASEAN countries and how their ties with China look. I'll just give a paragraph or two on some of these countries. Thailand, for example. The diverse nature of Thailand provides it with alternatives in economics and security matters. This means that China's influence over the orientation of Thai economy and politics is in fact quite limited. However, the Thai elite itself may, in their term, underestimate their own relative freedom. And this may hamper Thailand's ability or willingness to play a bigger role in China-Asean relations. Now, Indonesia. Indonesia's open and decentralized structure does not allow for easy manipulation either by outside powers. Instead, the wish to avoid obviously picking a side makes good strategic sense to Jakarta, and quote-unquote friendly ambivalence may be their best stance going forward, allowing for economic pull without strategic entanglements. Although the biggest Southeast Asian economy, Indonesia will continue to support ASEAN centrality as a way of handling the big powers. Now, Malaysia, I believe, will stick to its current approach to China, forging ahead with a quote-unquote comprehensive strategic relationship with China, whilst in reality making itself a quote-unquote small target when it comes to political disagreements with Beijing, and quietly reaffirming and strengthening military relations with the US at the same time. We come to Vietnam. Now, beyond party-to-party diplomacy, and after normalizing the bilateral relationship in 1991, Vietnam and China are committed to a quote-unquote long-term, stable, future-oriented, good neighborly, and all-round cooperative relations since 1999. This is an oft-repeated phrase in dealings between the two countries. Now, in June last year, 2013, the two concluded a quote-unquote strategic partnership covering all economic and strategic issues, and subsequently upgraded it to a quote-unquote strategic cooperative partnership. They further pledged to deepen such a partnership in October 2013. Now, lastly, if we look at Myanmar. Myanmar is repositioning itself between the big powers and between the medium powers as well. And its ability to do that does reflect the point often made that China's influence is exerted through investments, markets, and trade, and not through military and ideological alliances like in the days of the Cold War. This provides room for smaller nations to maneuver and for the possibility of balancing big powers, big investors, and big markets against each other. Finally, what about China-ASEAN relations? There's, of course, deep worry that the rise of China, the rise of India, and the reassertiveness of Japan will make intra-ASEAN collaboration and integration that much harder to achieve. There's ground for this worry, of course, but the role that ASEAN will be trying its best not to fall into playing in the coming years will be that of proxy for big power rivalry. The role it can play best now for its own sake is to be the forum for big power dialogue, being in the driver's seat, as they like to say. The larger worry for Southeast Asian countries within the framework of ASEAN, in the final analysis, is failure on their part to project and maintain common strategic ambitions, be it in staying neutral or in seeking economic integration. Now, I believe that once economic integration in ASEAN stall, then the development of ASEAN as an organization will suffer badly. And that will bring consequences, of course, to each of the member countries. The forces pulling at the region are real, but as long as ASEAN remains beneficial to dialogue between the big powers, the organization and its members can feel safe and can continue to develop economically. Thank you.